Tonight, when you close your front door, you will do something no other species on this planet does. You will lock it. You will check it once, maybe twice. Then you will walk deeper into your shelter, settle into the warmth you have manufactured for yourself, and sleep, completely separated from the open world outside. You do this so automatically, so completely without thought, that you have probably never once stopped to ask why. Not really. Not the deep version of why, because the obvious answer, safety, comfort, permanence, sounds right. It sounds complete. You live in a house because houses are better than caves. That's the whole story. Except it isn't. Not even close. Here's what nobody talks about. For most of human history, caves were not a problem to be solved. They were not a primitive phase that our ancestors were desperate to escape. They were, by almost every physical measure that matters, superior to what replaced them. Better insulated than the average home for hundreds of thousands of years. Naturally climate controlled. Structurally permanent in ways that no human-built structure could match, and yet somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, humans began walking away from them. Not because they had to. Not because the caves ran out. There are still thousands of habitable caves on this planet right now, sitting empty. They left because something changed. Not in the caves. In us. And when you understand what that something was, what it actually was, not the textbook version, you will look at the four walls around you right now in a completely different way. Because the shelter you are sitting inside of at this exact moment is not just a structure. It is a monument to a decision your ancestors made tens of thousands of years ago. A decision that was, depending on how you look at it, either the greatest thing we ever did or the beginning of the longest loss in human history. You want to know why they left. And the real answer starts much earlier than you think. Most people, if you ask them, would say the answer is obvious. Humans built houses because they got smarter. Because civilization happened, because agriculture arrived, and people needed to stay in one place and tend to their crops, and you can't do that from a cave in a hillside 3 miles from your field. That answer is everywhere. It's in textbooks. It's in documentaries. It's the version of events that feels clean and logical and satisfying. But that's not quite right. Here is the part that gets left out. In 1994, archaeologist João Zilhão at the University of Lisbon published analyses showing that cave occupation in the Iberian Peninsula didn't end with agriculture. It overlapped with it. Early farming communities in parts of Europe weren't abandoning caves because agriculture demanded flat open settlements. Some of them were farming and living in caves at the same time. The two things coexisted for centuries, which breaks the clean story completely, and it gets stranger. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science by a team from the University of Southampton found evidence that Neolithic humans in Britain, people who had already mastered animal domestication, pottery, and early grain cultivation, were returning to caves, not because they were lost or desperate, deliberately, for ceremonies, for the dead, for something the researchers described carefully as ritualized re-entry. They knew what a house was. They chose the cave anyway. So if the departure from caves wasn't purely driven by agriculture, and if early civilized humans kept coming back, then the question becomes something much more interesting than we were taught. The question becomes, what were caves giving us that we couldn't get anywhere else? And what did we lose? Quietly, permanently, without anyone writing it down. The day we finally stopped going back. Most people stop here. They shouldn't. To understand what was actually happening, you have to understand what a cave meant to the human brain. Not metaphorically, neurologically. In 2015, neuroscientist John Allen at the University of Southern California published a book called Home: How Habitat Made Us Human, in which he argued that the human preference for shelter is not a learned cultural behavior. It is hardwired, baked into the architecture of the nervous system over hundreds of thousands of years of cave dwelling. He called it the prospect and refuge response, a state the brain enters when it has a protected position with a clear view of open space ahead, high ceiling, deep interior, narrow entrance, the exact geometry of a cave. When your brain detects that configuration, something very specific happens. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for threat detection, goes quiet. Your cortisol drops. Your breathing slows. You feel, without knowing why, deeply safe. Think of it like a volume knob on anxiety. Being in open space turns the volume all the way up. The human nervous system in the open is always listening, always scanning, always half expecting something. But the cave, the deep interior, the narrow mouth, the rocky walls surrounding you, turns that volume almost completely off. For the first time in hours or days, your brain could stop performing its endless threat calculation. And in that silence, something else could happen. Evidence of what happened in that silence was discovered in 1879 by amateur archaeologist Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola and his 8-year-old daughter Maria in northern Spain. They had entered the cave of Altamira, crouching through a low passage, when Maria looked up at the ceiling and said, in Spanish, "Papa, look, oxen." The ceiling above her was covered in bison, painted in red and black, moving in ways that required an understanding of perspective that would not officially appear in Western art for another 14,000 years. Your ancestors painted those animals while standing in the dark, by firelight, in a space their nervous systems recognized as the safest they had ever felt. And here is the part that stays with you. The paintings weren't near the cave entrance, where the light was. They were deep inside, as far from the outside world as it was possible to go. The artists weren't decorating a home. They were doing something deliberate and ceremonial and unrepeatable. Something that required the cave not just as shelter, but as a specific state of mind. A state you can only reach when your brain's threat system finally, completely, goes quiet. That state was what the cave was for. And then something unexpected happened. Humans found another way to achieve it. Here is what was actually happening. The cave gave you safety. Deep, ancient neurological safety. The kind you feel in your chest rather than think in your head. But it gave that safety to you alone, or to a small band of people who happened to share the same rock. The cave was personal, private. It was the world reducing itself to a space you could see all the edges of. The human-built structure was something different, something the cave could never be. It was proof that the person next to you had chosen to stay. Proof that the strangers on the other side of the wall were not threats but collaborators. Proof that the future existed, that someone had agreed, without a signed contract or a formal institution, to be here tomorrow and the day after. In 2018, anthropologist Kim Sterelny at the Australian National University published research arguing that the transition from natural shelters to constructed ones represented not an architectural revolution, but a social one. The built shelter was a commitment device, a way of saying to the people around you and to yourself, I am not passing through. This is where I am. The cave said, I am safe. The built shelter said, we are here. And your nervous system, which had spent hundreds of thousands of years being calmed by rock walls and narrow entrances, had to learn a completely new kind of safety. Not the safety of the enclosed space, the safety of the agreed-upon community. Think of it like upgrading from a lock that only you have the key to a neighborhood watch. Fundamentally different mechanism, fundamentally different kind of trust required. Right now, as you sit wherever you are reading or watching this, your shelter is doing both things at once. Your walls are offering you the prospect and refuge response your ancestors felt in the cave. But your address, the fact that people know where to find you, that your neighbors exist, that your door is on a street, is offering you the second thing, the human-made thing, the thing that required 10,000 years of social evolution to produce. You are living at this exact moment at the intersection of two entirely different solutions to the same ancient problem. How do I feel safe enough to stop watching the dark? The cave answered that question one way. Your ancestors, slowly and without fully understanding what they were giving up, decided to answer it another. We traded the silence of stone for the noise of each other. There are still caves in the world that no human has entered for 10,000 years. The paintings are still there. The handprints pressed into the rock by people whose names we will never know, in languages that no longer exist, After days you and I cannot imagine. They went deep into the earth and they made something, not to be found, not to be remembered, but because the cave was the only place quiet enough for that kind of making. The only place the world could be held still long enough to be looked at. And then, one morning that we cannot date with any precision, someone walked out and didn't come back. Not because the cave failed them, because something outside called louder than the stone, called quiet, tonite. When you close your door and lock it, you are completing a gesture that began 10,000 years ago. You are choosing the second answer, the noisier one, the more complicated one, the one that requires strangers to become neighbors, and neighbors to become something close to family. Your four walls are not a retreat from the world. They are your bet on it. Your wager that the people on the other side of those walls are worth the exposure, worth the risk of being findable, worth everything the cave never asked of you. Somewhere in a hillside in France or Spain or Turkey, a cave is sitting empty right now in the dark, holding the shape of a fire that burned out before your civilization existed. And the walls remember what you have mostly forgotten, that safety was once something you could touch with both hands, something cold and permanent and entirely your own. You gave that up. All of us did, and here we are, together, in the noise we chose instead.